Thank you, Mia. Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be moderating this panel on water access and equity. As Mia mentioned, I'm an associate professor in the Ag-Econ department here at UC Berkeley in the next building. And I'm really excited to hear what our panel of experts is gonna tell us about water access and equity. Welcome, David. Come here, sit down. You want to sit over here? All right, so we have a fantastic panel. So we have David Zilberman, who you already know quite well. We also have Paolo Odorico. So Paolo, I don't think you've met. So he's the Thomas J. Graff Professor of Water Resources in the ESPM department. And he's also faculty in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. And he's an expert in hydrology, water resources, water security, and water sustainability, among many others. So welcome, Paolo. We also have Ali Ode, who is part of this year's BEARS Environmental Leadership Program. You already must know him. And he's the Executive Director of the Union of Palestinian Service Water Providers. Thank you, Ali. And then finally, well, you already met Michael Mascarenas. So thank you everyone for being here. So the way we've organized this panel is we'll have a 1-hour discussion. I'll pose some questions to the panelists and some follow-up questions, but mostly it's going to be an open discussion. And then in the last 30 minutes, we'll have questions from you, and so we can start an more open dialogue. Okay? So maybe before I ask the panelists to give us their introductory remarks, I just wanted to set the stage. I was reading up on global water issues, and a few facts stood out to me. So one is that 70% of the earth is covered with water, as we know, but only 2.5% of that of Earth's water is fresh water. So it is, when you seen from that perspective, it's a scarce resource. In terms of usage of that 2.5% of global water that is fresh water, it's mostly used for agriculture. That's the lion's share, and so that means food for us. Next is industry, and lastly is residential use. So that's one fact I wanted to mention, to set the stage. The second is, because this is a water access and equity panel, is that this is part of the Sustainable Development Goals that we set out a few years ago, and the goal is one of the SDGs, number 6. It was universal and equitable access to safe and affordable drinking water by 2030. So that was the goal. And I wonder whether we're going to be on track to achieve that. It looks unlikely given the growing water crisis that we're observing. I mean, I think that climate change has been hitting us in the face, and it's reallocating water across the globe, and it's really setting huge challenges for the future. So I want to hear from the panelists on all of these global issues from their own perspectives, and that's what this panel is going to be about. So let me start by asking Paolo, to start with you, if you can give us your introductory remarks, then we'll have David, and then Michael, and then Ali, if that works. So we go kind of more global to more local. So Paolo, yeah, the stage is yours.
Take this. But this microphone is for a recording, I guess. Yeah. Okay. So, well, thank you, Marco. I think your introduction is very important, because many times people talk about water issues and they mix things. Water is in so many places, in so many contexts. We are all made of water. So it's so general that sometimes the discussion becomes vague or inconclusive. So first of all, the water we use for many human uses is fresh water. There is a big difference between fresh water and salt water. So sometimes sometimes mixing the problems of coastal flooding with problems of river flooding or a drought, mixes problems that don't have much in common. So if we look at that 2% that is fresh water, that's fundamental for many human activities, mainly for the production of food, and even those problems can be divided into classes. Water as a resource, or water as a source of hazard. So water for problems of drought, impact of drought on agriculture, for example, and water as flooding, killing people, destroying property and human activities. And if we look at water as a resource, you said, most of it is for agriculture, and sometimes that starts very big discussions, but the fact that to produce water, to produce food, we need water, means that the water crisis is most likely a crisis of people going hungry before a crisis of people remaining thirsty, because we take much more water for agriculture than for drinking, and so many times the lack of drinking water is mostly lack of treatment, so it's most of an economic or institutional problem. Instead, the lack of water for agriculture is more of a hydrological problem, in the sense that there isn't enough water physically to sustain agriculture. With this said, sometimes there is also water, but there is no infrastructure to use that water, and that is sometimes defined as a problem of economic water scarcity, in the sense that with the right infrastructure we can enhance, for example, the production of food. So I think this is important, and so in the sense that water there is a nexus between water and food, which means also that the increasing demand for food commodities implies that also an increasing pressure on the water system. And while the green revolution has removed some other limiting factors, like for example fertilizers and soil fertility, water remains a major constraint, water and land, a major constraint on increasing yields. And so when we look at even the idea of intensifying agriculture, we need to see if there is the water to close the gap existing between current and potential yields. And so we can see where in the world this is possible and where this is not possible, and how under climate change this might be affected. Another big problem in the context, I don't know if this is part of following discussion, but when people say, okay, because of climate change there is going to be less rainfall. Globally, this is not true. All that rainfall is going to be the same. In fact, if anything, there is a slight increase in precipitation under climate change. The fact is that some regions of the world will see less water, and typically are regions that are already dry, and so there is the problem of where climate change is affecting water availability to sustain agriculture. And maybe we can stop here and we can have another comment.
So thank you, Paolo, for the introductory remarks. Next we'll hear from David. David, you have the microphone.
Okay, so generally speaking, the key, there are two or three things about water. I think one key element in water is there is incredible heterogeneity. Some areas of the world, in much of the world, you don't really have water scarcity. For example, if you look at in Canada, on average, you have incredible amount of water, but even within Canada, there are some areas that are very, very dry. And to some extent, there are big differences, so you cannot speak about a price of water. The price of water depends on time and location. And in the same place, like if you look at California, in the winter, the price of water sometimes may be negative. Last year, we have a situation that the area that we have an artificial lake because of excess water in the same area that you pay $1,000 per acre foot. So one of the big issues is how you manage water over space and time. The other thing is really big differences in the productivity of water in different locations. Now, and there is also a big difference in people's willingness to pay or ability to pay for water. So, for example, in a place like Cyprus, people are really, when you have a drought, people are really willing to pay about something like $2,000 per acre foot, which is quite a big amount of money. or even in Jordan, which is a really poor country, people are pay a lot for water. On the other, in California, if the price of water go above let's say $100 per acre feet, farmers are not willing to pay. So because of these differences in pricing and availability of water, you have huge differences in productivity, and one of the challenges is how you manage water efficiently and how you move water and how you bring water to people that really need it. So in some areas, like in California, you have on one end subsidies of water, on the other end you have people that really don't lack water. The other thing that is important is water quality. Like for example, we have in the Central Valley, some areas, incredible amount of water that people basically, that if you go on the highway, you see that the highway is flooded in water, and then you have farm workers that don't have water because you don't have the sanitation. So there are several big challenges in water. One type of water issue is distributed equally. Provide people for a minimum amount of water, because if you are poor and you don't have money, you still need to drink. The other thing, when you use it in industrial uses, use it efficiently. And thirdly, I think if you look in California, I think in California we are much more suffering from flood than we are suffering from drought in terms of economic losses. And I worry more about the fact that hundreds of thousands of people may die if Sacramento is flooded than if you have a drought. So this is another reason. So to some extent, these are short-term issues. On the other hand, in climate change, some area will be totally devastated, and you have a huge migration, and to me that's the number one political problem that we have already. We have it in Africa, that what I think was a result of what happened in Syria. So to some extent, the seasonality of water and the invariability of water are a big problem. The last thing, a lot of people asked me yesterday, California will expect a water problem. I personally don't think so. I think that what will happen in California and in many other coastal areas of the world is that you will have a lot of desalinization with solar energy. I think that a lot of the 20 or 30 years from now, a lot of the water projects that we have that move water from the inland to the shore will disappear because we'll use solar energy. So that's what we'll have in a coastal area. What I worry is rising water level. So if you are in a place like Bangladesh, you will have too much water, and you will have to worry about it, and people will have to reallocate themselves. So I threw a lot of ideas only to suggest that when it comes to water, things are very complex. Context is very important, and the big issue is not water. The big issue is poverty. The big issue is politics. The big issue, all the other things in the system. Water problem per se can be solved. Everything else around it is complex.
Thank you so much, David, for those fascinating comments. They've made us, I think they've made us start thinking about a multitude of issues. So I'd like to get now Michael's introductory remarks.
Thanks. There's an old Native American saying, you build a village where the water is. And I would suggest that the ability of the modern state to modernize has largely been a result of its ability to own, control, and manage its water supply. Whether that's London, Paris, New York, or LA, right? These places grow and develop because they were able to steal, cultivate, or culvert, move, contain water. As a result, the problem of the modern nation state is a problem of water, right? And it's a problem of water out of place, right? Flooding in one area, droughts in another, inequality in another, right? And the ability for justice to be done by the state will be done through its ability to distribute water equally. I agree with my colleagues that agriculture does take a lot of water, but most of the agriculture that is most of the water that feeds our agriculture does not go to food, right? It goes to commodity crops, soy, corn, and those go to feed cattle. Those go to produce commodities. A lot of the crops we grow or that use water are not subsistence crops per se, right? They might be things like almonds, right? And so there's a class aspect to that. It's a political, as Dave was saying, a political aspect to that as well. But I think water water has been a barrier to capital accumulation since we tried to commodify it. We can put it in a bottle, and that's as good as it gets. But the fact that it can occupy 3 different states, right? Air, liquid, solid, the fact that it moves, right, it has been a challenge to commodification. Right? We've figured out the land problem. That's done, right? We've got that done, solved. Water is an obstacle to capital accumulation, and it continues to be a challenge to people who try to manage it, to states who try to control it. Increasingly, we're seeing wars fought over water. We are seeing international plans to culvert and divert water across national boundaries. Right? And again, I go back to my initial statement that this is the fight of the future. Right? And I just think about the Colorado River and the pact, the pact of the 7 states that are supposed to agree on ratios and quotas and withdrawal quotas, and they couldn't do it, right? And so, that points to me how precious that resource is to the development of these communities, and how unwilling they are to compromise, right? And to think about water as a collective good, right? And so that's the struggle for me, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, Michael, for those comments. And finally, we're going to hear from Ali and his remarks and based on his experience. Thank you, Ali.
Thank you. Water and energy scarcity in the Middle East is a main concern for all of the governments there. In Palestine, particularly, this is a much sensitive issue due to Palestinian lack of control over their water resources. So our main role is to ensure maximum use of the available water resources. So before start speaking about our organizations, I want to speak a little bit about the water resources in Palestine and some of the figures and facts. In Palestine, we have 4 main water aquifers with a capacity around 700 million cubic meter. Also, we have Tabariya Lake. Also, we have some springs in some cities, and we have a desalination plant in Gaza. So the area has a good amount of water. But the issue is the access to the water resources. The Palestinians are allowed to reach now for 15% of the groundwater only. For the Tabariya Lake, we don't have an access, 0%. To the Jordan Valley is also 0%, just 15% of the groundwater only. In Gaza, We have a coastal aquifer. You know, I don't know if you understand the map very well. We have West Bank, Gaza, also Israel. This is as a fragmented area. In Gaza, we have a coastal aquifer. There is a huge bombing from Gaza because we have 2 million people there. Also, a huge number of groundwater wells around Gaza in the settlements. So the water level become down below the sea level, and the saltwater intrusion goes there. So 98% of Gaza water is polluted by nitrate, and a huge number of blue babies there, and some of them died. Anyhow, there was some solutions before the war, but stopped. And also now the water desalinations, we have 3 there, 1 completely destroyed, 1 partially destroyed, and 1 is still working there. This is in the general situation about the water resources. Okay, for our organization, in West Bank, we have 250 water service providers, more than United States, more than Europe. This mainly because of the political issue. For example, I'm living in a village. This village has a groundwater well since before 1948, so we have the right to pump from this. We are selling a village close to our village. This village also selling water to another village. So the price is different, the administration is different, everything is different. So because of this, we have 250 water service providers. So to overcome the geographical fragmentation, on that account, a platform for cooperation in the Palestinian water sector was founded, which is called the Union of Palestinian Water Service Providers. What we are doing in this organization, we are implementing capacity building programs at different levels: technical, managerial, financial. Also, we are arranging yearly international conference. We are bringing experts for the most needed issues from the whole world. We are developing manuals for wastewater management, also for water supply. We have technicians working for non-revenue water. In Palestine, we have 50% non-revenue water, leakage or commercial non-revenue water. So that means we only have access to 7% of the groundwater, because we have 15%, so half of this 50% is we lose it. Also, we are helping the service providers to develop a tariff management system. The tariff is totally different from north to the south. Okay, we also are working in development projects. Such of the projects I started before I came here is installing a prepaid water meters for factories, because they have a high consumption and they sometimes didn't commit by payment. This is kind of the things we are doing. Also, another projects we started before I came here is energy efficiency, water energy efficiency, because we have limited resources of energy and water. We are trying to maximize use of to optimize use of the water utilities pumping. This is the main things that we are doing in our organization. Okay.
Thank you for everyone for the introductory remarks. Obviously, everyone has a very different background, so we'll try to let you guys convey as much of the message you want to provide to the audience as possible. So I wanted to start with Paolo. So first question is for Paolo. Can you pass him the microphone, please, Ali? So the question I had for you, Paolo, is the following. You made a very interesting remark, which is thinking of water as a resource versus water as a hazard. that lines up with what David mentioned, right? So drought versus flooding. And I wanted to see if you can tell us about what excites you, or what do you think are the challenges that you are worried about or thinking about in managing the challenges brought about by climate change. So maybe tell us about what you're excited or worried, what should we be thinking of as we confront this future.
Okay, thank you, Marco. So I think we can look first at the water as a resource, and again water for agriculture. I think the main challenge is that when we look at some of these climate change studies, some parts of the world that are cultivated are expected to see more drought, so more water scarcity. And areas that where agriculture, these are also in temperate zone, agriculture is suitable now in rain-fed conditions, we require irrigation. Some areas that are irrigated will require more water for irrigation. And sometimes they where the water is available, because if it's not available, there isn't much option. The problem is there is often a mismatch between when the water is available and when it's needed for irrigation. And so we did this type of studies. We saw that this mismatch is expected to increase, which means that there is going to be an increase in the need for storages. And we know that water storages are very controversial. So of all water infrastructure, I'm a hydraulic engineer, so I'm fascinated by them. So we know that they are very politically controversial, also environmentally, because of the erosion they cause downstream, and also because also it's a way to gain control on water resources. And so there are many issues that sometimes make it even less viable. And there are now an interesting aspect, an interesting thing is that we are revisiting all their ideas of groundwater storage, which are presented sometimes as new things, but instead people have been talking about them since ever. So, and the idea of storing water below ground, which sometimes could be called now some sort of a green infrastructure instead of gray infrastructure, in the sense that you don't need to build, you need to still some infrastructure, but much less impactive, but then you can store water during the wet season and use it during the dry season. So that's probably a new, not a new thing, but a new direction that we can take. Even here in California, there is interest for this type of approaches. The other thing is when we talk about irrigation, there is also the whole debate about what type of irrigation, and again and the impact that this irrigation can have downstream, because of the fact that if we replace flood irrigation with drip irrigation, there is a reduction in return flows, so whatever is not used by plants, and so this deprives of water downstream areas or the aquifer. So there are these issues. From the point of view, instead of water for flooding, as David was referring, that's a major issue, and we have seen that continuously in the news, right? So this is also a challenge to study this phenomena, because we used to, in classical hydraulic engineering, we used to say a certain event has a certain return period, but the return period was calculated always under steady state conditions, and the climate system is not steady state. So there is a lot of research happening now to characterize both the drought and the floods and their return period, which can change in somebody's lifetime.
Thank you, Paolo, for that. That's pretty exciting to think about. Let me ask the next question to David. And here, being a colleague economist, we often think of the market as having certain advantages in terms of management aspects and efficiency. But we often overlook aspects of affordability when we allocate via market mechanisms. So I was wondering, I wanted to hear your thoughts on what programs or experiences domestically or internationally you have seen that give you hope that we can achieve success in terms of providing sufficient sustainable and affordable water to populations worldwide?
No, the issue of water allocation and pricing is the old issue. Now, one approach that we work a lot on is the approach that is called tiered pricing. Tiered pricing is an approach that you have a certain low price for a basic amount of water, which is a lifeline, and then beyond a certain level you have a higher price, and then at the third level you have the market price. So if you are rich, you pay a large amount, and if you are poor, you pay a lot amount, and a lot of cities have this type of solution. Now, actually in California we tried to introduce this type of thing, and there were a lot of legal systems that prevented it, but in many parts of the world tiered pricing is working. Now, one big issue is not so much is that water infrastructure in many places, the issue is not the price of water, the issue is that do you have a house? Do you have a pipeline to the house? What's the issue of sewage? So a lot of time, maybe about 20% of the people in the world basically get water, buying it, get water illegally. So to some extent, moving towards a system where you have a market and all the elements that are associated with formality is not relevant to a lot of poor people. They need to be linked to a system where they basically are part of the population that is legitimately recognized as part of the population. And that's the reason that a lot of times allocation of water is an informal, by an informal mean, or people get a certain amount of minimal water for free. Now, generally speaking, you really don't have a lot of places that water is allocated by market per se. Like in California, we try now for years to introduce water trading, and that basically, and it's done very, very gradually. We have a system of water right that basically first come, first serves. The only area where you have, and this is mostly in agriculture, the only area that you have some sort of water market is in the urban sector, because surprisingly people pay in the urban sector much more for water than in the rural area, because the infrastructure in the urban sector is much more expensive. And in some cities you have, like what I said, the tiered pricing. In other cities you have utilities that basically charge people. But altogether, you know, in principle, markets work. In reality, you have very little use of market, and there are a lot of other arrangements that allocate resources, that adjust to different, to variations. So that's the reason I say we don't have the same price of water all the time. It's different in different locations. And the one thing that Paolo said, one of the most interesting things that happened in water was that till 1970, the way that you solve California or almost every place in the world, water problem was to build a dam. Mm-hmm. So population was growing, there was relatively a lot of water, there were a lot of developers, so they built one dam after another. What happened in California, which I think is a really good lesson, is that 1970, for whatever reason, people say, gosh, we don't want to divert more water. And surprise, we don't have new sources of water. We basically get much more out of the water, because slowly we introduce water trading, very slowly. We introduce modern irrigation strategies. We start using conjunctive use. So a lot of time what really is happening with water, that the easy solution is to build a new dam rather than to think about a mechanism that use water more efficiently. Mm-hmm. So the way from an economy, the way I look at water is not from, gosh, do we have a market, but is the water use efficient? What is the benefit-cost ratio, taking into account the environmental benefit? And then we have different institutional arrangements that are appropriate to the situation.
Thanks, David. I'll ask you to follow up in my next round if we have time. If you tell us more about the Water Management Act in California, so how that's been delivering results or not. So, but I'll hold off on that. Next, I wanted to ask Michael the following. I was really. I listened to a few minutes of your lecture on water justice, and as you mentioned there, a lot of the disadvantaged communities, right? They have very little voice and agency in terms of the decisions that get made in terms of water infrastructure for them. And I was fascinated by your work in Flint, in Michigan, which is kind of the poster child, right, of environmental injustice, water injustice. And I wanted to ask you to give us, the audience and us in the panel, what are your main lessons from that experience, from that work?
It's a good question. But not everyone is familiar with what happened in Flint, right?
Yeah, maybe start there.
Okay. So, Flint, Michigan. So Michigan is like this. It's kind of that's what it looks like. The UP's up here, but Flint's about right in the middle of the state. And it was a city where General Motors had its central office. And in the 40s, 50s, 60s, General Motors built its empire in Flint and designed the city to not only have manufacturing, right? So they built roads and railway systems. The state and federal government had suburban policies that allowed for suburbanization, they basically built the city to run for a population of about 200,000, right, at its height. Flint was seen as the epitome of how to do industrial development in the United States. In many business schools, Flint was heralded up as a city of urban planning and infrastructure. And of course, over the years, you had particular policies in this country around I would say poor labor policies. You had globalization. You had white flight, and in the United States, the real disinvestment in suburban communities, right? And much of the industry first left the Rust Belt, so the sort of northern states, moved to the south where there were no unions, and it was cheaper to manufacture cars and other things. And then they moved to other countries, right? Mexico and through NAFTA and other global pacts. That left many of those cities, like Flint, unable to, let's say, keep the lights on, right? The population went down from 200,000 to 90 pretty quickly over 3 or 4 decades. Most of the people, there's a saying that most of the people that could leave those cities left, and so and through segregation policies in the U.S., those cities were predominantly poor and predominantly black. So you have cities like Benton Harbor, Flint, Michigan, Detroit, right, 80% black, and so in 2014, a Republican governor was elected, and a Republican state Congress, and a Republican state Senate. So 3 levels of government were all Republican. And what they did is they put in an austerity policy that said if urban centers were financially insolvent based on a set of criteria, the state would take over. The state would come in and they would put in what they called an emergency manager to clean up house, right? To pay off bills, they would come in, they would take over the authority of the elected local government, right? So no more democracy in these places. And they would come in for a certain period of time, and they would make things better in these communities. Now, one of the interesting things to know is that 34 states in the United States have these powers, that where the state can kind of step in and take over the city of Berkeley if they feel like the city of Berkeley hasn't kept up, hasn't been financially solvent or responsible. So in Flint, what ends up happening is the state-appointed emergency manager tries to balance the books. And you can imagine over decades of disinvestment, decades of foreclosures and things like that, that it's very difficult to do that. So one of the ways they want to try to do that is to switch its water supply. They're going to switch its water supply from Detroit. Detroit gets water from Lake Huron, it treats its water, it sends it on a pipe 75 miles north to Flint, and Flint distributes it. The emergency manager says, we're not going to do that anymore, we're going to save some money, and we're going to build our own pipe. But it takes money to do that, and it takes time. And so in this time where we're not spending money and buying money from Detroit, or buying water from Detroit, we're going to switch to the Flint River. We're going to get our water from the Flint River. The city doesn't know how to treat its water, doesn't know how to treat water from the river, right, which changes over seasons. But more importantly, they violate the lead and copper rule because they don't treat that water with orthophosphates that's needed. So the water comes in, it's very corrosive, it corrodes the pipes, lead goes into the system, and they intentionally poison about 90,000 people as a result. The community, right away, the water turns brown, people's animals start dying, people's hair falling out, rashes, people are kind of getting burnt from the water, and they say this is wrong, what's going on? They go to city council, but city council has no authority because there's a state-appointed emergency manager. And the state says, there's nothing wrong with the water, we're on top of it, we're going to fix it. And they don't, right? They basically lie to the community. And this goes on for 16 months. And I'm talking about EJ and community involvement. You know, the community got together, they sought out scientists, they tested the water, they proved that the water had lead, had other things in it as well. And eventually they were allowed to go back to the original agreement and purchase water from Detroit. But that essentially is the story in Flint. It was able to be done to a community because democracy was decision-making authority around how to get access and control local water sources was dissolved, excuse me. And so that was kind of the result of state policy and politics.
Well, that's sobering. Thank you, Michael. So I have my last question, I think, because we're running out of time, is for Ali. Obviously, we're very interested and we're aware of the short-term urgent issues. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit about that, and maybe a call to action if people need to, I wonder how the international aid community can do anything, and longer term, what are the main risks and opportunities you see in the Palestinian water sector?
Okay, for the water access for the Palestinians depends on a lot of things, but I will talk about 3 things. The first is to increase the water supply. Since, as I told you, the Palestinians are not allowed to dig any groundwater well, the last 2 wells since 1967 we are allowed to dig 2 wells. One was in 1998 and the other was in 2007. And in case you want to dig a well, it's considered illegal illegal well, and I don't want to speak about the cases what will happen in case you try to do such thing. So we need to increase the water quantity. The other issue is to improve the infrastructure. For the water supply network, it covers around 60% of the Palestinian areas. So another 40% are not covered. They are using trucks to take water. Also managing water losses, as I told you, we have 50%. For the main risks that we have is limitations and restrictions from Israeli side on different things. Even for transferring water from area to area. For example, in the northern of West Bank, we have a good quantity of water and the situation is much better than the south. But you are not allowed to make like a national water carrier. You can submit a permit and get a reply after a lot of years, maybe 10 years or 15 years or whatever. So this is one of the risks. The other risk is climate change. For example, if you go to the Dead Sea, you see areas, the water level started decreasing by meters, not centimeters like somewhere, by meters. You see dry areas. And the Dead Sea is something global, not for Palestinians. It helps in medications a lot of people all around the world. So this should be taken in consideration. The main supply water for the Dead Sea, it comes from the Jordan Valley. Now you don't find any drop of water in the Jordan Valley because the two things, King Abdullah Canal in Jordan and the national water carrier in Israel. Also, we have a problem for lack of funding. I don't want to speak about that. It will take a lot of time. For the opportunities, we have Palestinian human resources experience very well in the water issues at all levels. Also, we are highly open for regional and international cooperations. At a short level, at a short for short term, for solutions, we can work on different things. The first thing is we need more pressure on the Israeli government to continue selling Palestinians as at least the previous quantities before the war. A shortage in the quantities happened. Some such of cases, if you go to Bethlehem city, in some areas they didn't have water since 30 days, or some of them 40 days, some of them 50 days. At the same time, if you go to the settlement, which is some meters away, far from the city, the consumption of water by settlers is from 400 to 600 liters per day, since they have a swimming pool and luxurious life. But at the same time, Palestinians, they have in this city 30 to 50% in the normal case. This is documented in the World Bank reports. Also, we need the pressure to continue selling the water as before the war. We can also working as a short term in implementing a reservoir at the community levels or balancing tanks. We can also enhancing the rainwater harvesting and the treatment of this water because it's easy the access. Using solutions for saving water consumptions like vacuum toilets or other things because it consumes a high quantity of water. At a long term, we can controlling over the key performance indicators such as non-revenue water, collection efficiency. We have a huge problem in the collection efficiency, tariff structure, operation and maintenance issues, industrial waste, and such things needs to be worked on the long term. Securing additional quantities as per the Dead Red Agreement, and to be fair, agreement, not like Oslo Agreement. If you go to Article 40 in Oslo Agreement and read the terms of the agreement between Palestinian and Israeli, it looks like that Palestinians are forced to sign to lose their rights in the water. Anyone can go to this Article 40 in Oslo Agreement. I was so kid at that time, but I had a lot of meetings with the Palestinian negotiators. I asked them, how did you sign on this? This is, I don't know. Also, we can, as a long-term performing institutional and governance for the Palestinian water sector. As I told you, it is not governed very well. And now there is a project for the World Bank to make clustering or to make a national water company for, I hope they succeed by that. This is in general. We have specific things, but it looks that my colleagues are tired and cannot complete.
Thank you so much, guys. So we have, I know you guys are anxious to ask questions. It's been fascinating, the multitude of topics we've touched on. So I want to open up the floor next, if you guys want to ask questions to the panelists.
Yeah, I have a question for Michael, because you raised the subject a few times, even with the example from Flint. Democracy and the way democracy is done, performed in our, in the law countries actually. And it goes back also to the training that you're doing with the local communities. So in those trainings, do you talk about just environmental justice, or you go beyond and you go all the way to empowerment of local communities and real democracy, like citizen empowerment and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think the work it's not really environmental justice as much as it's sort of political sensibility, right? It's about knowing who is in your community. It's about knowing where you live, and what you live beside. The work we're doing in Oakland right now, it's about, we do toxic tours, right? So we are just taking people in the community and going, look, there's a port here, there's a train track here, there's all these developments in your community that you need to be aware of, right, that are impacting your health. There are elections that are coming up. Find out where your local council member is on these situations, and we want to lift those people up. So part of what I'm trying to do is not to do a lot of the work is around kind of, I don't want to say victimization, but it's about how certain groups are disproportionately impacted. But what I'm trying to do in my social activism is to lift up the work that people are already doing, right? Because these folks, like I said at the beginning, like a lot of these folks are quite aware of what's going on. What they don't have are the networks, access to power, voice. They don't have the researchers that help them do that type of collaborative work. And so I feel my impact is part of that, right? Part of that social movement, and helping where we can. And that is providing, like right now we're providing data on the impacts of gardening programs in Oakland elementary schools, right? To show that that's part of a curriculum that shows not only around food sovereignty, food sustainability, food access, but also helping kids get outside, right? Helping them cultivate a sense of, hey, I could become an environmental scientist if I wanted, right? Building a passion around working in the mud, or working or planting trees or crops, and they're like thinking about careers, right? All of a sudden that are aspiring, right? And that's kind of how I see social change, right?
Awesome. We have another question. Comment from the audience? You can keep on speaking if you like. But please, it's a good opportunity because we have such great panelists. Yes?
Thank you. I want to know, how could we start moving to thinking more holistically, since I also asked to some speakers before why people don't see watershed perspective to improve the quality of water, since we know that many cities are in the downstream and rural area in the upstream mostly. And when the downstream pumping, when cities in the downstream always pumping the groundwater, and the upper stream always having land degradation or agriculture or land clearing, and And so how could we establish or giving more chance to water capture and then enhance the quality of water if we don't think about the whole problems like that? And I know that some point that watershed also divided by regional boundaries, even country boundaries. So like how could we start for unlock that kind of like thinking and situation like that?
That's a great question, and maybe I want to tie it up to the experience in California that I wanted to ask you about, David. So there's two regions that I'm aware of that are struggling with this depletion of groundwater. One is the California Valley, and the other one is in India through excessive water extraction. The approach here in California has been this new, well, now not so new, but newer law on the California Groundwater Management Act, which took a whole watershed approach, right? And they allowed different agencies to come up with their own solutions. But I want to hear from David on this, what your views are. Is it working? What would you have changed? And one question is whether it's integrated between just rural agricultural uses, or does it integrate residential and industrial uses too in that act?
Generally speaking, because I've been working in water for, I don't know, I'm 70. So generally speaking, the last 100 years, most people realize that you have to think about water from a regional perspective. So if you look at the big water projects that take water, let's say, from Northern California to Southern California or throughout India, so generally people think about build these big water projects. Like as I said before, there was the long period that the solution to population growth was more and more water projects. Now, I think that, I said before, water is a problem. But there are much bigger problems. Land is 10 times bigger than water. What do I mean? Like Palestinian-Israeli problem. You don't have the settlement, you don't have a water problem. You have two-state solution, you don't have the water problem. So to some extent, and the same thing is true everywhere. Water is part of the, now, so what happened in California, till the 1970, the big solution was water project. Then in 1977, there was a big drought. And then people say, gosh, agriculture doesn't get water. What did agriculture do? They start moving to drip irrigation, okay? In 1991, I wrote all this stuff. In 1991, drip irrigation wasn't enough, then they start moving to water trading, and we'll solve the problem. Now what they did, they start moving to this groundwater regulation. And again, if you look at it, I think we wrote about the need to have some centralized water regulation for about 20 years, and then after 20 years, policy thing matter. So what I learned about working in water, that when you do research, you write, and you think no one listens. But at the end, one day someone calls you and say, oh, do you think that we should have this type of thing? Can you come with the idea? And they buy your idea. Now, the California groundwater rule, if it works well or not, I really don't know, because we have 2 years with a lot of rain. So now the problem, like here we had an artificial lake in the middle of California. But altogether, there are several things that are happening. First, people pump less water, they change their land use, they increase the use of modern irrigation technology. Secondly, people realize now that you can that it's sometimes cheaper to desalinate water and to reuse circular water. So to some extent, in the long run, the problem is not so big. Now, I worked also in India. In India, it's a huge problem. Because what happened in India, I can give you an hour, what happened in India, the price of water for farmers in many cases is zero, and the easy solution every time is that the water go lower and lower and lower. So both in India and in China, there was this tendency, like we had in California in the past, every time that you really reach a water shortage, you build a water project to solve the problem. But now, you don't have any new resources. So in India, they have a huge problems of depleting aquifer, and they really don't have a lot of solution. What I suspect, which will be that in the long run they will start again desalinating water, because it's much easier, and that will make climate change worse unless they desalinate it with solar energy. That's the reason that I suggested to the university here that even from a global perspective, finding capacity to desalinate water using solar energy will solve problem in a lot of period. But in India, the problem is really incredibly severe.
Michael wants to.
I just want to think a bit more broadly about this. I think the institutions of modernity that are supposed to keep us safe, our health agencies, our environmental agencies, our academic institutions, are not dealing with the risks that we face, right? The risks we face aren't the ones that we have mapped out. They're not in situ, right? They're not, one explosion in Chernobyl affects the sheep in Ireland, right? So what is the regulatory apparatus to deal with that sort of risk? Well, there isn't one, right? And so the modern institutions have been built to work in a very kind of secular, traditional, non-global environment. They do work locally relatively well if they are well-funded and well-supported, but many of the risks we face are global. Climate change, for example. And no small, even sovereign nation state can handle that themselves. In other words, the regulatory agencies of modernity have to modernize. They have to change in order to deal with the risks we all face. And until the modern state remodernizes, we're still going to be unable to deal with questions like you are suggesting, downstream exposure to pollutants that started not in my country or not in my backyard. Well, the regulatory agencies in one state can't hold accountable the regulatory agencies across the globe. So until those agencies modernize, until the states modernize to deal with contemporary risks that we face, climate change being the most grand, we are always going to be asking those questions.
David, do you want to follow up?
I think the point is this. Politics and nature are not coordinated. So I've been involved in 2 or 3 cases, and one case is the basic issue is what happened when in China, along the area from China south to Vietnam and all of the Mekong River. You have a situation that you have several countries that are dependent on one another, and one country controls it. Another huge example is Ethiopia, Egypt, the Nile. And these are really, basically explosive situation. Because the moment that if Ethiopia has enough power to stop the Nile, you will have an incredible war. And in the Mekong River, it's all destroyed. And even if you look in the United States, an area that is, think about what happened in Louisiana, where suddenly the land is moving. So generally speaking, I agree with Michael, we really don't think beyond border. So California, we are lucky, we can solve a lot of problems domestically. We can survive without the Colorado. But in other areas, they are really in trouble. Think about all the area near the Himalayas. All these countries are dependent on one another. So to some extent, finding some sort of a global, more than one region solution is very important, yes.
Is there any good example of this? So I work mainly on oceans, and we have in the ocean sphere, in order to deal with transboundary issues, a lot of regional conventions. So how does it look like in the freshwater sector? Is there like regional agreements? Could you give a good example, like where things work pretty well?
The transboundary treaties, basically. That's the thing.
Well, I give you one that sounds unbelievable. There was an agreement between Israel, Jordan, and Syria to move water from a river called the Yarmouk to a lake of Galilee that move it back to Jordan. So there are a lot of practical agreement. The point is that all over the world there are a lot of agreement. But when it comes to the big, but what we are speaking about, that if enough that you have 10 or 15 big problems that really can cause you that can cause you incredible amount of problems. Like if you look at the area, Turkey and Iraq. This is an explosive area. They had many years, they have some agreement, now it's not existing. All the areas, Syria, Palestine, Israel, they have some sort of agreement. The moment they don't agreement work, you have a problem. So to some extent, and really a good, fantastic agreement is what happened in Australia. Australia had incredible water walls because they have a river called the Murray-Darling River, and what happened, southern Australia wouldn't get any water. Then the government decided to have one solution to the problem, and now they have a very relatively working water arrangement. So there are a lot of examples that work quite well, but there are still a lot of problems.
Then there is also the aspect of transboundary groundwater, because so those are, and there are many cases with disputes that are endless. You had a question?
Yeah, so the question is inspired by your comment, Michael, about secular institutions not being set up to regulate transboundary issues. Also recognizing that you mentioned previously within the United States, the church and the Black church has played a part of environmental justice movements. And then also reflecting on something a few examples of restoration projects that I've heard some of my colleagues reflect on, that a comparison of a Christian ministry running them that was really beloved by the community versus one from a more secular NGO that did not have connection to the community, was unsuccessful. I'm curious, and if you're comfortable, Ali, I would love to hear from you, like what is the difference, what role could religious institutions play in helping regulate or mediate transboundary water issues, and then also what is it like approaching like transboundary water issues in a region that has like more like religious like connection to the state compared to
You can
No, you go for it. I've spoken too much already.
But just to make sure that I understand your question very well, I heard you that you mentioned something religious.
Yeah, so I'm curious, what role do or could religious institutions play in mediating or regulating
the religious institutions? It doesn't kind of it's not a stakeholder of the issue. They doesn't have any input in this issue. For the transboundary water issues, the control is from Israel. Okay, so as I told you, we cannot dig any water, and it's really shared aquifers. So this is the situation.
If you look at the issues, religion, especially in the Middle East, are a big problem. Most of the settlers, basically, they look at the Bible. Think about it. A lot of people, the basic point there, that religion there is a big difference between American religion, between the black church that was the only galvanizing force for a lot of depressed minority during long period of time, versus two religions that they basically believe that they hold the truth. and they basically they are totally intolerant of other people. Generally, most of the agreement in the Middle East or any place were done between people that basically are modern and basically accept some science and modern agenda. I know the Orthodox in Israel, they have no compromise because God is with them. So to some extent, one of the big issues that you have is the effect of, it's not only religious, there is something religiosity. If people are very strong believers, it's very difficult to find a lot of arrangement because that will be the dominant factor in their life. I don't know what you think about it, Ali.
I think it's important to separate religious institutions from dogma. Right? Any institution, I think, has the potential for liberation, for democracy, for freedom. How it goes about that is important. Whether it's the family is another institution, right? The church is one, the sovereign state is another, and so we talk about these things, right? You know, in terms of climate change, it's going to take the best of all institutions. I don't think you can put one on the sideline and say, well, the church doesn't matter here. It matters because it brings people together. It's a form of community, and people act in community. I think that's how they organize. So I think you know, the church can be used for very, and has been, demonstrable things, but there's potential for good there as well.
Also mention, I think I forgot to mention, you mentioned, Ali, that like the religious institution is like not a stakeholder. That's something that I guess we'll talk about it more on Friday, but in our conflict and stakeholder management group, talking about like when you're looking for a neutral facilitator that's trusted by many stakeholders, like drawing on, you know, a religious leader in the community to facilitate stakeholder meetings, maybe at the small scale. I don't know if that works at the larger scale.
But to that point, is anybody neutral?
Like
all of the biases are like, so I'm not sure that you can look to honestly anybody as a neutral source or as a neutral facilitator in the issue.
I would also like maybe not necessarily in such a context, but rather I know, for example, where religious leaders have been part of programs to promote energy efficiency, for example, but there's no conflict involved. I think it gets more complicated with conflict, especially when there's different religions.
The religious institutions is not dealing with the water issues. The organizations who's tackling or dealing with issues is the authorities, non-governmental organizations, some experts, but the religious institutions is just in the we have like pray and Friday, they have a speech, they are encouraging saving water, encouraging to wash, something like this, but they don't deal with the main issues, with the water resources, with the water availability, with the regional issues, just at personal level.
Thomas, there was a question back there I want to take.
Yes. Can you please elaborate on how an individual or organization can deal with complexity, especially at the beginnings when everything seems to be very complex and intertwined? So how can we better deal with complexity? Because as you mentioned, so many things about what an individual can do, stakeholders, everything being intertwined.
I don't know. No, I think that especially in water, the big thing in water is identify what is the problem now. Problem, you need to work on two levels. You have to think about a long-term solution. But in water, working, especially in California, you all the time have to solve the problem at the present. Actually, I've done it in several places. I was actually invited to a panel that was supposed to deal with drought in Turkey, and at the end we had a flood. So the key element is how you are able to deal with situation, and do you have a flexibility to be able to assess what's going on and to be able to deal with the problem now, and at the same time, in the background, you think about some sort of long-term vision. you really need to have almost schizophrenic. You have these two personalities. Short term, because that's the only way you become credible, and long term that you have some vision.
Thank you, David. Let's have one last question.
Like with the transboundary water issues raised by Lisa, but was not discussed in this forum was the issue on water ballast discharge by shipping companies. It's quite alarming because of the introduction of invasive species across oceans and countries. What do you think would be the solution to this aggravating problem, the issue on this ballast water discharge?
Did you guys get it, or I didn't get the question exactly?
Water ballast, like ships traveling internationally and they're bringing invasive species in.
I see.
Discharging
In the ballast, I see.
This is quite alarming, and I think we should also focus on this transboundary issue.
Yeah, it's a little bit not directly related to the water resources, but yeah, biological invasions are a huge thing, right? And so it's one of the major global environmental change issues, along with climate change, etc. So that's a loss of biodiversity, and there is I don't think we can find an easy or comment easily on the solution of that. There is a problem that is well known, and then it affects all marine life
Introduction of endemic introduced species compromise the endemic species of one locality.
That one, there's been other cases, like the opening of the Suez Canal in the 1800s brought a lot of tropical species in the Mediterranean, affected food webs, etc. And that was just the beginning, because then with the intensification of trade, and trade has been escalating in the last 50 years, of course there is much more of that we are seeing. I don't have any more effective comment on it.
This is, like we speak about the problem, this is a global. Every country at most has 200 miles from its shore. So most of the oceans are at global common. We don't have a global government that basically comes to someone and says, gosh, you cannot dump your water in the ocean. So to me, I think the challenge of your generation is to develop slowly a global government to deal with global issues. Because this becomes worse and worse and worse all the time. Climate change, contamination of the ocean, what happened below the ocean. There are things that are really problematic, and unless people really get penalized and you have law, people do whatever they want to do.
Well, I mean, it is true, right, that our problems are becoming more global. Unfortunately, I fear that with the rise of nationalism, this becomes less likely. So I hope your generation can come up with a solution. Let me finalize with the following quote by Benjamin Franklin on water. He said, when the well is dry, we learn the worth of water. So I hope you all learned from this panel. I very much enjoyed it. Thank you very much.